In the spring of 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stood on a windswept beach in Normandy and made a prediction. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive, he told his staff. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day. He believed that if the enemy reached the beaches in force, they were already dead. He had good reason for that confidence. Behind him stretched the most ambitious coastal defense system in human history. 3,000 miles of steel, concrete, and firepower from Norway to the Spanish border. The Germans called it the Atlantic Wall. Hitler called it impregnable. 3 years, 300 million cubic meters of concrete, 500,000 tons of steel, hundreds of thousands of forced laborers. The Atlantic Wall was the Third Reich's greatest engineering achievement, and the Allies called it suicidal to attack. So what went wrong? To understand why the Atlantic Wall failed, we have to understand why the Germans believed it couldn't. That story begins not with concrete and guns, but with a single, catastrophic Allied raid, and the lesson Germany drew from it. August 19th, 1942. Nearly 5,000 Canadian troops and 1,000 British commandos land at Dieppe, France. Within 10 hours, over half are dead, wounded, or captured. It is the bloodiest day in Canadian military history. German defenders behind the seawall barely moved. Machine guns and artillery in fixed positions tore apart the assault before it reached the town. For Hitler and OKW, Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command, Dieppe was proof. A fortified coastline could not be taken by a frontal assault. The lesson became doctrine. By the end of 1943, Hitler had signed Führer Directive 51, shifting military priority to the defense of Western Europe for the first time in the war. The Allies were coming. Every German general knew it. The question was where. That uncertainty shaped everything. 3,000 miles of coastline could not be equally fortified. Resources had to be concentrated, and so the Germans made a decision that would haunt them. They fortified where they expected the attack, the Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point between England and France. The man responsible for turning that strategic bet into concrete reality was Organization Todt, the Third Reich's military engineering arm, named after its founder, Fritz Todt. Todt died in a plane crash in 1942. His successor, Albert Speer, pushed construction into overdrive. Workers, many of them forced laborers from occupied countries, poured concrete 24 hours a day. Bunkers were built to withstand direct hits from warships. Some walls were 3 to 4 meters thick. Gun emplacements were designed with overlapping fields of fire, so no approach was undefended. By mid-1944, the Atlantic Wall comprised over 15,000 fortifications, artillery batteries, machine gun nests, radar stations, minefields, underwater obstacles, and anti-tank barriers. On paper, it was exactly what it claimed to be. But one man looked at the Atlantic Wall and saw its fatal weakness. That man was Rommel. Appointed Inspector of Coastal Defenses in late 1943, Rommel traveled the entire length of the wall and was appalled. "The obstacles are insufficient," he wrote in his report. "The minefields are too sparse. The beach defenses assume the enemy will survive long enough to reach the shore." Rommel had fought the Allies in North Africa. He knew what Allied air power and naval gunfire could do to static defenses. His solution was radical. Don't try to hold the beaches, make it impossible to reach them. Rommel ordered millions of mines laid in the surf zone and offshore shallows. He designed wooden stakes tipped with teller mines, called Rommel's asparagus, to tear apart landing craft before they grounded. He demanded that artillery be moved closer to the beaches, not further back. He wanted the enemy destroyed in the water, not on the sand. "If we don't repel them at the water's edge," he told von Rundstedt, the theatre commander, "we will never repel them at all." Von Rundstedt disagreed. The older, aristocratic general believed in a mobile reserve strategy: let the enemy land, then counterattack with armored divisions held in depth. The two men argued bitterly throughout the spring of 1944. Hitler, characteristically, refused to choose sides and split the panzer reserves between them. That argument, beach defense versus mobile reserve, would prove to be one of the most consequential disagreements in military history. But in the spring of 1944, the Germans still had another problem. They didn't know where the blow would fall. Operation Bodyguard was the most elaborate strategic deception in the history of warfare. The Allies fed the Germans false intelligence through turned agents, fake radio traffic, and fabricated unit movements, all pointing to the Pas-de-Calais as the invasion target. The centerpiece was Operation Fortitude, a fictional army group. FUSAG, the first United States Army group, was invented complete with radio traffic, inflatable tanks, and fake landing craft. Its notional commander was General George Patton, whom the Germans believed would lead the main invasion. The deception worked beyond Allied expectations. German intelligence, the Abwehr, had been completely penetrated. Every agent they believed was reporting from England was actually working for British intelligence. Every piece of information the Germans received about Allied intentions was controlled. In the weeks before D-Day, German radar picked up fleet movements. Coastal observers reported increased activity, but OKW, looking at its intelligence picture, saw Normandy as a feint. The real blow, they believed, was still coming at Calais. And so, on the night of June 5, 1944, as 156,000 Allied troops prepared to cross the Channel, the Germans were waiting in the wrong place. The German defenders at Normandy were not elite troops. Many were what the Germans called stomach battalions, men with digestive disorders, older soldiers, recovering wounded. Eastern European conscripts who had volunteered for the Wehrmacht as an alternative to Soviet captivity made up a significant portion of the coastal divisions. The 716th Infantry Division held much of the Norman coast. Its commander, General Wilhelm Richter, had fewer than 8,000 men spread across 30 miles of beach. His artillery was a mix of captured French, Czech, and Soviet guns, many without adequate ammunition supplies. Behind Omaha Beach, the situation was different. By chance, pure chance, the 352nd Infantry Division had moved into the area for exercises in the days before the invasion. Allied intelligence had missed the movement. The men landing at Omaha would face twice the defenders they expected. At 6:30 a.m. on June 6th, the first American landing craft grounded on Omaha Beach. The bombers had missed, the naval bombardment had lifted, and the Atlantic Wall, at this one spot, on this one beach, came very close to working exactly as designed. Men died before they left the ramps. Machine guns positioned to fire along the beach, enfilading fire, swept the sand in both directions. The seawall offered the only cover, and hundreds of Americans pressed against it, pinned down, unable to move. For 3 hours, the battle hung in the balance. Sergeant John Ellery of the 1st Infantry Division later described the beach as an image from the inferno. Officers were dead. Units were scattered. The plan had dissolved the moment the ramps dropped. What happened next was not the plan. It was individuals deciding to move or die. Brigadier General Norman Cotter walked upright along the beach under fire, pushing men toward the bluffs. "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach," he told them, "the dead and those who are going to die." Small groups began cutting through wire, moving up draws, flanking the German positions from above. By midday, the bluffs above Omaha were in American hands. The Atlantic Wall, at its strongest point, had held for less than 6 hours. So why did the most expensive coastal defense system in history fail? The concrete was real. The guns were real. The mines were real. And at Omaha, for a few terrible hours, it nearly worked. The first failure was strategic. The Atlantic Wall was 3,000 miles long, but it could only be strong at a few points. Everywhere else it was, in Rommel's own words, a facade. A fortress with no roof, no depth, and no reserve. The second failure was air power. By June 1944, the Allies had achieved near total air superiority over Western Europe. German reinforcements moving toward the beaches faced relentless attack from fighter bombers. The mobile reserve that von Rundstedt had counted on simply couldn't move. The Panzer Lehr Division, one of Germany's finest armored formations, took 18 hours to travel 40 miles on the night of June 6th. Allied aircraft destroyed 85 of its vehicles before it reached the front. The armored counterattack that was supposed to throw the Allies back into the sea never materialized. The third failure was the deception. Even as German commanders on the ground recognized that Normandy was the main invasion, Hitler refused to release the panzer reserves. Still convinced that Patton's army was waiting to strike at Calais, he kept the tanks frozen in place for 48 critical hours. General Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzer Lehr, sent increasingly desperate messages to OKW throughout June 6th. He needed permission to move. The answer came back, "Hold." The Führer was sleeping. No one dared wake him. The armored reserves would not be released until the afternoon, when it was already too late. The fourth failure was the one Rommel had predicted. The beach obstacles were incomplete. The tide washed many mines harmless. The underwater stakes were placed at the wrong water depth and exposed at low tide, exactly when the Allies chose to land. Naval demolition teams cut lanes through them before the main assault touched shore. And the fifth failure, perhaps the most fundamental, was that no fixed defense can be impregnable if the attacker chooses where and when to strike. The Atlantic Wall was a linear defense against a three-dimensional threat. Airborne troops could land behind it, naval gunfire could suppress it, and the attacker always held the initiative. In the weeks that followed D-Day, the Atlantic Wall's failure became total. At Utah Beach, American forces had landed in the wrong place and found lighter defenses. By the end of June 6th, the Allies had established 5 beachheads across a 50-mile front. The German position in Normandy deteriorated rapidly. Rommel was wounded when his staff car was strafed by a British aircraft on July 17th. Von Rundstedt was relieved of command. Hitler fired and replaced commanders in a desperate search for someone who could reverse the tide. The Atlantic Wall, north of Normandy, the fortifications at Pas-de-Calais that had absorbed the lion's share of resources, sat untouched. German divisions waited there for an invasion that never came, while the real battle was being lost 50 miles to the south. What does the Atlantic Wall tell us about the nature of fortification? Military historians have debated this for 80 years, and the lesson keeps repeating itself. Static defenses, no matter how strong, are only as effective as the strategic context around them. The Maginot Line didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because the Germans went around it. The Atlantic Wall didn't fail because the concrete was thin. It failed because the Allies chose where to land, controlled the air, and controlled the information environment. Rommel understood this. In his final assessment before D-Day, he wrote, "We must destroy the enemy before he has time to organize." He was right, and he was overruled. The Atlantic Wall cost the Third Reich resources it could never replace: steel, concrete, labor, and strategic attention diverted from the Eastern Front, where the real war of attrition was being decided. It was not just a military failure, it was an economic one. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to Edge of War for more deep dives into the decisions, the personalities, and the turning points that shaped modern warfare. And if you want to go deeper on the D-Day deception, Operation Bodyguard, the turned agents, the inflatable tanks, that story is coming next. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it.